And this is the Leave Us Alone podcast, the podcast that champions individual liberty and limited government. I'm Grover Norquist, and today we're going to be talking about the fact that it's tax day, April 15th, what's happening in Washington, D.C. with extending the Trump tax cuts and how the IRS is being annoying. If you're new here, this show has one simple idea. This is made for people who wish to be left alone. Look around a table. Who's at the table on the Leave Us Alone Coalition? Leave my children alone, people who want school choice. Leave my guns alone. Leave my taxes alone. Leave my small business alone. Leave my property alone. Leave my faith alone. Whatever it is that you want to be left alone, if that's the key issue that you vote on, you're part of the Leave Us Alone Coalition, and there is a political movement that supports each of those liberty issues. And today, I am joined by Mike Palicz, and we're going to discuss tax day, IRS, and really stupid ideas floating around D.C. This would be a perennial, I think. So let's get started. Mike, what do you got?
Sure. Well, first off here, we have tax day. So it's the last day here, April 15th, for people to be filing their taxes. And I'm sure we have millions of Americans very frustrated seeing their tax bill. And as a reminder to everyone doing their taxes, when you're getting your tax refund, all it is the money back from the interest-free loan that you gave the government. So never be too excited about the size of your tax return. That's just the government ripping you off even more.
That's a good point, because there are people who get excited about that and think the government just did them a favor as they move that forward. Well, we had a press conference, Americans for Tax Reform, and a number of other groups.
We had Club for Growth with us. We had American Commitment. We had Job Creators Network, who represents the small businesses.
Independent Women's
Forum, Center for a Free Economy, and anyone else I apologize for leaving out.
Yeah, we had about 7 or 8. It was a good collection of pro-taxpayer groups talking about different ideas, good and bad, that are moving in Washington, D.C. and in the 50 states. So that was fun, but we did that early because Congress is out of session right now, and we wanted to do that ahead of time.
And for anyone who wants to go watch that, we have the clips on Americans for Tax Reform's YouTube channel and at our website at atr.org. It was a great press conference. We have lots of media attendance, a few news stories breaking from that, including in the middle of it, we had the Trump tariff news, the pause break in the middle of our press conference, which of course became a subject of the conversation.
That was interesting. Yes, we were breaking news, or somebody was breaking news while we were doing a press conference, and then we added that in as it got texted to us.
But Grover, so back to folks who are frustrated that they're paying their taxes today, we do have some good news coming out of the Trump administration regarding the IRS and specifically the IRS union. Yes,
the IRS is unionized. How did that happen? Well, in 1978, Jimmy Carter, the guy everybody speaks highly of because they forgot what he did when he was president, he signed the law that allows most of the federal government to be unionized. Now, what they did say there is, except Army, Navy, Air Force, CIA, FBI, and this is the key part, and any department or agency that is key to national security, and that the president, not Congress, not the courts, not some bureaucracy, the president decides that what the union does is interfering with national defense. And the IRS advertises itself as the entity that goes out and gets all the money to pay for the Army, which is true. And that if they weren't there, the Canadians could overrun us and we'd all have to talk funny. And that would be no fun. So they advertised that they're part of national defense, and the Trump administration took them seriously and listed 7 or 8 different departments that cannot have labor unions. I guess you can have a union, but the union can't negotiate anything, can't collect dues from people using the government's resources, cannot be given official time. Official time sounds good, you'd think. Official time is when you and I, as taxpayers, at the IRS, at the Pentagon, at the VA, pay people not to help older and sick veterans, not to have a strong national defense, not to collect taxes, but to run the union. So people work full time. They get office space, official time, and official space. And I'm told that one of the first things that the union negotiates for is the best offices. So you want to know where the good offices are? Ask for the union guy that you and I are paying for. That is now over. There will be no more taxpayer subsidy of unions. those unions will cease to exist as bargaining units because they all have civil service protection, which already makes it impossible to fire people who've been chopping up their neighbors.
And just so people have that right, to be clear, Grover, the IRS employees were on the taxpayers' dime allowed to use taxpayer-funded space to do union organizing, to, on the clock, do union activity. Is that right?
Yes, and it's fully partisan activity, too. About 95, 98% of the money that organized labor, that the labor unions at the IRS spend, goes to left-wing Democrats.
Yeah, and I think if you need any further evidence that Democrats are the party of government, that's the perfect example. It's, about 98% of IRS money is going to Democrat candidates who then turn around and what's the priority of the Biden administration is handing $80 billion in funding to the IRS.
Yes, and having gotten more money, everything that they do became less efficient. People were working from home. The calls in, this was tested by the government itself. They'd call in to the numbers to see who answered the phone. And in some 75 different tested calls, only 3 people picked up the phone. Some people were told, call back later, or it just rang, or, oh, we don't have any more room for any messages, or leave a message.
And while the IRS can't do these basic functions, another Biden administration priority that the Trump administration is taking on is shutting down the Biden effort to turn the IRS into a tax software company where they would have the IRS not only be the auditors and managing contested returns, but be the actual people who file your taxes for you. I don't know why anyone would think the IRS would be the most invested, the best person to go and make sure you get the best return as possible.
Think of all the paperwork you have on your desk when you fill out your taxes. The IRS would have to have all of that in front of the IRS guys who would figure out your taxes for you. And
this is direct file.
Direct file. And then they would send a bill to you, say, this is what you owe. And what if they were off by a couple $100 and charging you too much? Do you really hire a lawyer for $5,000 to try and get a few $100 back? Or you just live with their guesstimate being expensive?
Yeah, and this is, of course, the left always tries to sell it. They play a sleight of hand and they call it free file. Well, ignoring the fact that tens of millions of Americans are already filing their taxes for free with the existing software companies. Instead it's an attempt for them to take over the entire tax prep space.
And before we leave the IRS, our friend Joni Ernst of Iowa, senator, has great legislation that says if you work for the IRS and you don't pay your taxes, you can actually get fired. That seems pretty robust. That seems like a good idea. I would have thought that was the rule anyway. Maybe
Audit
the unions
auditors.
Don't allow it. And she says we should audit the auditors. We should audit the auditors at the IRS and make sure we know what they're doing. And also she's been pushing for getting them back into the offices rather than working from home, the IRS agents that do work. And what else we got?
Well, we have major tax development news, starting off with the good news, which is we did have the House clear a huge procedural step in the path to renewing and extending the Trump tax cuts last week when they adopted the Senate amendment, which ATR supported, which is key, Grover, because it gets us the current policy baseline, which is what we now have Congress as they pivot towards now actually doing the tax policy of the Trump tax cuts.
And this is just common sense. Right now, 90% of the Trump tax cut is still in place. Some of it's melted away, it needs to be restored, but 90% is there. If you simply continue it into the future, nothing changes. And the Democrats want to say that's a massive tax cut. Nothing changes. Your per-child tax credit will remain the same. Your standard deduction will remain the same. Your lower tax rate will remain the same. So each of these things, at the corporate rate is already going to be remaining the same and staying down. Passing this bill takes present policy and makes it permanent. It doesn't change things. It makes them the same. If we do not do this, there will, over the next 10 years, be a $4.5 to $5 trillion tax increase.
Yeah, and it reflects the reality of what we're doing here is preventing the largest tax increase in American history from happening. It's hard to imagine any lawmaker going back to their district and telling their constituents that if the Trump tax cuts had expired and they had a major tax increase, things like their standard deduction getting cut in half, child tax credit getting cut in half, their rates and brackets all leading to higher taxes, that wouldn't be a tax increase. That would just be current law taking effect.
And when we passed the tax bill that we're now trying to extend, we had a 40-vote margin in the House of Representatives. Today, it's about 3 people, depending on who's showing up. That means that you have to have almost every Republican. So it is amazing the leadership of President Trump in getting all the Republican House members together. Mike Johnson, the Speaker of the House, Scalise, the leader, and Jason Smith, who is the Ways and Means Chairman. These guys are really like herding cats because everybody has their own idea. You've got to get together and do one thing, but everybody has, lots of good ideas and some bad ideas. Getting that group together and only being able to have 1 or 2 people sit outside whining or upset on any given day it's amazing. They've been able to do it several times now.
And for anyone who's interested in learning more about the current policy baseline specifically, at ATR, we've put out a lot of content on this, including some fun ones recently where, of course, the Democrats are out crying about the Republicans using this as the baseline. But we've pointed out that when President Obama was in office, Democrats loved this, and the Obama administration argued for a current policy baseline. So, of course, Democrats supported it then. Faux budget hawk groups like the Committee for Responsible Federal Budget, in their endorsement of the extension of the Bush tax cuts, for example, they used a current policy baseline analysis in their support. Of course, now when it's Republicans in office doing it, they have a problem with it all of a sudden. So we've had fun pointing out all this hypocrisy. And if you want to go learn more at atr.org, you can see why using a current policy baseline is appropriate.
I'm not surprised the Democrats do that. It's a little annoying when the establishment press does the same thing as if they were Democrats as opposed to trying to be referees at some point. Anyway, one quick reminder here. If you're enjoying the conversation, take a moment to rate and review Leave Us Alone, this podcast, on your favorite podcast platform. It helps us reach more listeners who care about freedom. And don't forget to share this episode with a friend who values liberty. Now, back to the discussion. Mike, what problems are looming? What's Scylla? What Charybdis?
Yeah, so the conversation has shifted quickly here because we are now, pretty much past the procedural hurdles where we're now talking about the substance of the tax bill, what policy is going to be in it. And unfortunately, I think we've seen a few bad ideas floated out there too specifically. We'll start off with talk about letting the top individual rate hike expire, or even the creation of a new quote-unquote millionaires bracket, which we've seen supported from anonymous staff in the White House, several stories leaking now. And then, unfortunately, a few congressmen as well who are starting to backtrack now, but who have put this idea out there publicly. Grover, can you tell us a little bit about what allowing the top rate to expire, or what Trump actually did with the top rate, and then who pays the top rate?
All of the rates, we have a graduated tax system. We should have a flat rate tax system like many states. Almost half of them have a single rate tax. 24 have a single rate tax. But a graduated tax taxes different groups at different rates, and the higher income Americans pay a higher rate, not just more because they earn more, but a higher percentage of their income goes to the government than somebody middle class or poor. And this is a real challenge because when we want to take taxes down, you have to take like 4 or 5 different rates down. And then people wonder whether somebody's getting a better deal than them. So if you have one single rate, taking the rate down becomes a lot easier. What has been suggested by some insiders in the White House who won't give their names, which gives you some idea that they're not exactly speaking for the president, or the president would say it. The president speaks very clearly about all the things he does.
He's not shy at sharing his beliefs.
Yes, and you don't even have to ask him. He walks outside and tells the press, for crying out loud. It's when you hear somebody inside that they announce that's what they're doing. You wonder why somebody's leaking. But some people have been leaking, say, we should, instead of taking all the rates down, and every American who pays taxes got a tax cut with the Republican tax cut, each rate went down. And then that will disappear, the lower rates, and they'll pop back up again unless we continue the original Trump lower tax cut. Some have suggested that we should allow the top rate to stay high and to click up higher, rather, actually to be increased.
To roughly 40%.
Yes, of the last dollars that you earn. That would, of course, discourage work, savings, and investment. We know it slows growth because this is not a new stupid idea. This is an old stupid idea. When George Herbert Walker Bush 41 got talked into this very stupid idea by the Democrats, not by, Republican staffers theoretically in and around the White House. He broke his pledge. And of course, President Trump has repeatedly said that he wants to cut taxes for everybody, not just some. High income, low income, middle income, everybody. He said it again and again and again. It's what he said when he got elected. It's what he said when he got reelected. It has been his campaign. The only person who ran saying that the top rate should pop up, back up, rather than stay down is Kamala Harris. That was her campaign. So you have some idiots in the White House, staffers, going, I like the Kamala Harris idea. I think that's very populist. No, it's vicious and full of envy. It's a dumb idea. It's bad for the economy. What happened when George Herbert Walker Bush raised the top rate? Let's see. He lost the next election. We lost House and Senate seats, and taxes went up, and we had a recession. All bad things.
And I think it's so important to run through this because the way the media is covering this as, oh, well, this is the new populist Republican Party. This is ridiculous. It's not populist to raise taxes on anyone. There's never been a populist tax revolt in history where people said, actually, you know what? We're taking to a mob because our taxes are too low. That's never happened. Well, if we look at what red states are doing across the country, they're lowering their taxes. They're going to flat zero rate income taxes. There's nowhere in the Republican grassroots that is raising taxes right now. And I think your point about H.W. Bush is so perfect because we have a new quote from someone who's pushing this on the outside today in National Review from Steve Bannon, former fired White House staff in the first term. And this is how he frames it, that raising the top rate would, quote, it cements the fact that Republicans are not the country club Republicans of the Bush junta. So the pitch here is we can remove the Bush element of the party by repeating the same exact mistake of the H.W. Bush presidency.
Yeah. This is a Bush League move, raising the high tax. Does he look in the mirror and when he practices these things, does he not hear him saying something that's counterfactual to what he wants? What a disaster. Couple thoughts. The modern Republican Party, 2/3 of governors have signed the pledge never raising taxes. No Republican governor is pushing for tax increases. Even the ones who haven't signed the pledge are not pushing for tax increases. They're all out there reducing taxes, moving them to flat rate taxes. 12 states are announcing we're going to zero, take our tax down to zero. At the national level, in Washington, more than 190 members of the House have signed the pledge never to raise taxes and kept it, and 44 senators. And Republicans captured the House and the Senate in 1994 when 96% of all the Republicans signed the pledge and said, basically, we are the party that will never raise taxes. Before that year, 1994, the previous 62 years, the Republicans won Congress twice, once under Truman, once under Eisenhower. Since 1994, when the Republicans said, we're never raising taxes, what happened? Well, they've won the House and Senate 18 years, and the Democrats 6 years. The Republicans have outperformed the Democrats, not been in the situation where they were for 62 years, where they're out into the wilderness. They were the Washington Generals who lost all the time to the Harlem Globetrotters. Now the Republicans win the House and Senate more often than the Democrats do because they won't raise taxes.
And to be clear, I think the idea that the president is going to break one of his central campaign promises, which is to cut taxes for everyone across the board, is ridiculous. That's why you see these anonymous staffers leaking. No one's willing to put their name to it. And we've had, the full House Republican leadership team has shot this idea down from Speaker Johnson, Leader Scalise, Whip Emmer. I think you've seen people who are very close Trump allies like Larry Kudlow say this would be one of the dumbest things he's ever seen in politics. I think he said one of the top 3 dumbest things he said. So if anyone's interested in this at atr.org, we've put out a great list of all the conservatives who are making clear that they oppose this and don't think that Trump will do this. At Americans for Tax Reform, we're obviously opposed to this idea. We've seen other organizations like Club for Growth come out and say that they would oppose any legislation that raises the top rate. So I think so far as this is a trial balloon coming from anonymous staff, it's certainly being shot, being killed in real time here.
And that is important. These are staffers who have their own ideas. They didn't run for office. They're undermining the President of the United States, who said the opposite. They're undermining the Republicans in the House and Senate, who ran and campaigned on the opposite. And they're not paying attention to what happens to Republicans who raise taxes. In Colorado, Republican governor supported an effort to raise taxes, and what was solidly red, Republican governor, Republican House, Republican Senate, is now a deep blue state. In Virginia, Republican legislatures raised taxes to help Democratic governors waste money, and they lost the House and the Senate. And it is a sadly increasingly blue state. Youngkin did a heroic thing in winning control of the governorship, but it is now a bluer state. Anytime Republicans vote for tax increases, it weakens the forces of freedom.
And President Trump gets this. I know, Grover, we've talked about this before, but one of the things we love going back to was during the Republican convention we were both at, we got to see President Trump's speech there.
Yes.
When you're in person, you can see what's on the teleprompter on the wall. And you can see when Trump, when he goes on his riffs and he likes to weave. So you can see when he's not reading off a teleprompter. And we saw him talk about tax off script for about 5 minutes, where he made it clear he thinks it's the dumbest idea ever for he doesn't understand any politician who runs on raising taxes. And he was slamming Kamala Harris at it. So I think any idea that Trump's going to be anything but the biggest Republican tax-cutting president we've had is absurd.
Republicans have branded themselves since 1994 as the party that won't raise taxes, and brands are important. This is Coca-Cola spends a lot of money advertising their brand and maintaining quality control. That's why you can go into a store, pick up a Coke in a bottle, and take it home. You don't have to ask to taste it. You don't have to read the ingredients. You don't have to ask the proprietor whether it's any good or not. You know what's in there. You know what it's recognized. You take it home. If you were to take your bottle of Coke home and go drink halfway through it, and look down and see a rat head in what was left in the bottle of Coke, you wouldn't say to yourself, I'm thinking I may not drink all the rest of this Coke tonight. You would actually say to yourself, I may never buy Coke again. I'd get my little iPhone out and show it to the world. And Coca-Cola would have a big, big problem. Republican elected officials who vote for tax increases are rat heads in a Coke bottle. They damage the brand not just for themselves, but for everybody else. These little munchkins in the White House who are leaking that other people would like to raise taxes are hurting Trump and the Republicans because the press loves to grab that and say that it's true, not that it's leaked by somebody trying to undermine the president.
Yeah, it's the story the media wants to write about the tax cuts. They would love nothing
Always.
more than to say there's a Republican who's raising taxes.
Even if there isn't one.
So we'll move on from the individual side right now and small businesses to talk about the other potential bad idea being floated, which is increasing business SALT. Now, some people might be familiar with individual SALT, and that was an element of the 2017 tax code in which Republicans traded state and local tax deductions.
SALT is
state and local
and
tax
local
deductions,
taxes.
right? Your ability to deduct those in order to cut tax rates for everyone across the board, which had the impact of essentially for people who lost this deduction, mostly cared about it in states like New York, California, New Jersey, blue states that are high tax on individuals. But Grover, the 2017 tax code did not address this for businesses. Can you talk a little bit about the difference between individual SALT and business SALT?
Sure. Individual SALT, which was largely reduced, only the first $10,000 is deductible, is something that doesn't subsidize big cities that overtax and states that overtax, and it puts pressure on cities and states to reduce their taxation, or people will not move into the state or leave. Businesses are not as mobile as people, and we tax individuals on their income. We tax businesses on their profits, and you don't have money if you pay property tax and sales tax and corporate income tax to a state, to a city, and therefore that should not be part of your taxable income because it's not part of your profits. So I think they're two different things, and a lot of companies have zero ability to move. You're a railroad, you're an airplane, you drill for oil. You can't decide to move to a different state because of tax policy, even over the long run. Good news is I do believe we will avoid reducing or eliminating the deductibility of BSALT, business, state, and local taxes. Also, there are two kinds of businesses. They're the ones where the business person, man or woman, both pay their taxes through the individual tax code or through the corporate income tax. And those are two different ones, and it's very difficult to get rid of BSALT without damaging small and independent companies disproportionately.
Yeah, and it's one thing if you're following the 2017 Trump tax cut blueprint, which is, oh, we're going to trade in the SALT deduction for a tax cut to cut rates for everyone. But unfortunately, it doesn't look like it would be one thing if we were talking about business SALT in exchange for the 15% corporate rate cut that Trump
That would be a good
on.
idea. That could be a very good idea.
That would be pro-growth. However, it seems like the discussion is, well, here's a way we can just tax businesses to pay for tax cuts elsewhere.
And the reason that's so outrageous is that conservatives have done a good job of explaining to people that businesses don't pay taxes. The local grocery store does not pay taxes. When you buy potatoes and milk at the grocery store, you pay their corporate income tax, you pay their property tax, you pay the sales tax. They collect it, but you pay it. Or they can reduce wages for their workers. They can end up paying it in lower wages or fewer people hired. So the corporate income tax is just a way of hiding the incidence, who gets hit by the tax, which is why our friends on the left love it. They love a tax that nobody quite knows who pays it, or rather that they say, oh, I don't want to tax you. I want to tax the grocery store you go to. I want to tax the car company you buy a car from. And of course, you're paying those taxes directly. But if you keep listening to PBS, you would know that.
And the ideal corporate income tax is 0% rate.
Yes.
Now, that's not where we were. And I think, unfortunately, this is another area where this idea being floated around would take us the opposite direction of what the president campaigned on, which was further cutting corporate income taxes because they exist to hide the ball on who actually pays taxes. It's households, it's consumers, it's anyone invested in the stock market. But what we're seeing now, our friends at Tax Foundation have put out a study essentially saying this is the equivalent of a 2 to 3% rate increase.
Yes, it is.
More on other industry. A Tax Foundation did a great work to show that it's actually manufacturers who are the hardest hit industry on this. And during the campaign, we actually saw Trump even tailor his corporate rate income cut specifically to increase for the purpose of increasing domestic manufacturing in the U.S. It'd be a huge mistake to then go in the complete opposite direction and do a corporate income tax hike that hits manufacturing harder than any other industry. I think it's contrary to what the president's goals are.
Well, and we've been talking about the president's tax cut, and to be clear here, the president is not arguing to raise rates. The House and Senate leadership have made it clear this is never happening. What you do have is a handful of people in and around the White House, staffers, saying, we think this would be a clever political idea. Well, you know what? Leave that to the president. He got elected. You didn't. And he said the opposite of what you're doing. Your idea, this idea they call themselves the New Right, these characters, actually they're Rockefeller Republicans, if one is old enough to remember that. Let's give the unions more power over workers, and let's raise taxes in order to fund welfare systems, because that's how you be, that's not progressive, that's how you be populist. You be populist by putting people on welfare. That is not how the Republican Party came to be the party in control of the House and the Senate and the presidents, but the opposite of that. These people want to adopt the policies of the Democrats, which lost the last several elections and in congressional terms have been losing elections since 1994.
And that's why I think you're starting to see these anonymous leaks coming in the media now, because they're frustrated with what the president's agenda actually is. It's not what they wish it would be. What we're seeing is, as we talked about earlier, the president's taking on the government sector unions. He's fighting them, which isn't what they had.
He's dissolving them.
Yeah, which is not what
That's better than fighting.
He's fighting and winning and killing them, which is the outcome that these people don't want to see. So they're leaking anonymously to undermine what the president's agenda is.
Yeah, the president has used the law passed under Jimmy Carter, 1978, that says you can't have a union if it's important to national security in your department. He has pointed that out. He's given all the examples. And he said this union no longer exists because it shouldn't, because the law says so, and the law says president decides. This is not going to be a tough one. There's no judge is going to be able to keep from giggling if they try and say the president can't do this, because the law says the president, nobody else, the president makes this decision.
And I think on the tax front, right, the president's been absolutely clear. What he wants is his 2017 tax cuts made permanent with additional pro-growth tax cuts. And I think that's what we're going to see here as a final product. Yeah, and if we actually have the opportunity here, we do have, and when it comes to the business SALT, Americans for Tax Reform has an ad campaign that has been launched last week.
Oh, it's a cool ad.
Next several ad leaks. So we'll see if we can put that in here so folks can hear it now.
The next phase of our plan is to pass tax cuts for everybody. President Trump won on a promise to cut taxes to keep American businesses competitive. So why are some Republicans pushing to raise taxes? Our tax rate is already higher than communist China. The current BSALT plan is a tax hike on American business. And when business taxes go up, workers and families pay. Tell Congress, make the Trump tax cuts permanent. Stop the BSALT assault.
And this will continue over the next several weeks. And Grover, if you want to take us out here.
Okay. Well, that's the ad that we have been sharing with the world. Hope you enjoyed it. And that is it for today's episode of Leave Us Alone. Thank you for joining us. If you enjoyed this conversation, please rate, review, and share the podcast. Helps us reach more freedom-loving listeners. And we'll be back next time with more thoughts on protecting your liberty. Until then, I'm Grover Norquist, reminding you to work for a government that will leave us alone.